Hello and welcome to Starwood's live Q&A on pet travel to Australia. I will be your host today. My name is Georgiana Straight and I am the marketing manager here at Starwood. So I help oversee all of our various marketing activities, including the implementation of the Q&A that you're listening in on today. Also on the call, we have Rosemary Can and Molly Place, both pet travel coordinators at Starwood. They've been with the company for several years, over half of a decade, and they've helped facilitate pet moves all around the world with a particular focus for Australia. So we're really excited for them to be on the call with us today. And before we dive into today's live Q&A portion of the call, I wanted to share that we will be giving away some fun goodies today, including a branded Starwood Pet Travel pet bandana, as well as a $20 Amazon gift card or $200 off your pet move. To enter this, all you have to do is simply ask a question in the chat, follow Starwood Pet Travel on any of our social media platforms, and we will actually be announcing the winners live in real time at the end of today's event. So make sure you stay tuned for those giveaway announcements. Also, before we dive into our live Q&A portion, we wanted to go through the typical timeline it takes to move a pet from Australia. So it is a very long process. Most clients, it takes 8 to 9 months, which can be kind of jarring for a lot of people just starting to get familiarized with this process. It's definitely not a quick process by any means. So I'm going to pass it to Rosie and Molly to kind of talk through each of these individual steps.
Thanks, Georgiana. I'll kick things off with the microchip identification process. For this, you're definitely going to want to make sure your pet is obviously already microchipped. I also strongly recommend making sure that you have either your current or newest rabies certificate handy just to ensure that all the information listed is correct. So your vets that you're going to partner with moving forward can match that information. For this microchip identification process, you'll need to work with not one, but two USDA accredited vets at two separate locations, meaning two separate physical addresses or practices. At the appointments one and two, each vet will perform a microchip scan, take some photos of your pet with the microchip scanner showing, and then list out all of your pet's details, including date of birth, color, markings, microchip number, and each vet will submit that paperwork and photos to the USDA for processing. Once those come back as approved, you will complete step 3, where one of those two vets will resubmit both of the approved forms together. This process needs to be completed within 3 months, but you could do the first couple scans within the same day if you wanted to. Molly, would you like to talk about the rabies titer test?
Thanks, Rosie. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. It is important to note that after the microchip scans, if you do not yet have a rabies vaccination, a current rabies vaccination, we want to make sure that is done before the rabies titer test. The titer test needs to be done. It's a blood draw that is going to be done by a USDA certified vet. That is required. And once the lab receives the rabies titer test, it's going to be about 180 days for the earliest eligible departure date for your pet. We do recommend waiting until that third and final step of the microchip identity scans is received and endorsed before you do the rabies titer test. Rosie, back to you.
Once the titer test has been completed, our team will take care of the RNAT declaration, which is a form that the USDA looks at to ensure that the titer test has been performed by a USDA accredited vet. They'll also take a look at the rabies vaccination certificate to ensure that all the details match. And that process usually takes about a week or two, but that processing time can vary depending on how busy the USDA is. Molly, you want to talk about the import permit?
The permit, so once we receive the endorsed RNAT declaration, we cannot request the permit without the RNAT declaration being endorsed. So our team will step in and request that from the government. And then the import permits can take anywhere from a few days to 4 weeks or more. It just depends on the government processing times. Summers can tend to be a little bit longer, but so far we're seeing some really good processing times right now. Rosie?
Kind of similarly with quarantine booking, we need to have the import permit back and approved first. Then, most often Australia quarantine is able to accept for the dates that we request. A few times of year, like around Christmas holidays or the winter holidays and in the summer, those processing times can take a little bit longer, and there is a slightly higher chance that the date we request might not be approved. So if that does occur, then we'll offer you the next available space, or there would be an option to go on a cancellation list so that you might get an earlier date should a space open up. That processing time currently is looking like a couple weeks, but sort of like with the import permit, those processing times can vary as well. Molly, you want to talk about flights?
Once we have the quarantine booking, at that time, we'll touch base with you to kind of finalize some more details. So from the time we receive quarantine booking to the time flights can be requested, there can be a little bit of time in there. So just know if your details are not finalized earlier in the process, that's okay. We can touch base, we can amend, we can change things a little bit further down the road. The flights can be requested between 3 and 4 weeks before departure. They cannot be requested earlier. Right now we are working with 2 airlines, Qantas, which is 21 days prior to departure, and Qatar has currently changed their process timing, their booking window to 10 days prior to departure. That's just while they're keeping an eye on everything. We do expect that to probably go back to the 21 days prior to departure a little bit further down the road.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing that. I'm actually just getting word that we're having a live stream issue with Facebook and Instagram, so we're going to take a really short pause to address that, and we will be right back. Thank you for being patient. All right, we are back, and it actually looks like we are all resolved with our live stream issues, so that's really great. If you're just joining us on Facebook and Instagram, we did run into some technical issues previously where our live stream was not transferring over to those accounts. So thank you for your patience, and we are back in action. If you did miss us, I just want to quickly go back a slide. We will be giving away some goodies at the end of today's live Q&A, including a Starwood Pet Travel pet bandana, a $20 Amazon gift card, and $200 off of a Pet's Move. So to participate, simply ask a question in the chat, follow us on any social account, and we will announce winners at the end of today's event. Rosie and Molly on the call also just briefly went through the timeline it takes to move a pet to Australia. Typically, it takes 8 to 9 months, which can come as a surprise to most people that it is such an in-depth process. But if you have more questions about this in particular, please drop your questions in the chat and we will be happy to answer them. Before we jump into the live Q&A portion, we also just wanted to share a little bit about why pet parents trust Starwood for their Australia moves. Throughout our many 40 plus years in business, we have serviced over 1,000 pet moves to Australia, including guidance through all of the strict import timelines and requirements, also providing step-by-step support for ID checks, RNAT testing and documentation. You can also opt to have your pet transported door to door, so from your origin all the way to your destination, which makes it really easy and takes some stress off of you on already such a complex move. And we have dedicated pet travel coordinators to help you with your pet's move in real time, including Molly and Rosie on the call here. Some top questions that people typically ask about moving pets to Australia include the timeline requirements, all of the various documentation and microchip needs. What is it like in quarantine at Mickleham after your pet lands in Australia? Certain things like airline kennels. There's a lot of strict requirements around the type of airline kennel you may need that a lot of pet parents don't know until they get really far into their pet's move. And where does your pet travel? Can they be with you, or do they need to be in the cargo hold of the plane? We also get a lot of questions around costs and how we handle large dogs with anxiety. And with that, we are now opening to the live Q&A portion of our stream today. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we will happily answer them for you. We will have a couple of questions coming in throughout various channels, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So if you're on a channel where you're not seeing a question come in through another source, it could be that we're answering that. Just wanted to share that with you all. All right, so just looking into some of the first questions coming in right now. Can I visit my pet in quarantine? So Molly or Rosie, I'm not sure which of you want to take that. And maybe we could also delve into a little bit about like what quarantine is and why that process is required for moving pets to Australia.
Unfortunately, owners are not allowed to visit in quarantine. I know many years ago, quarantine was a lot longer. I believe it was a month, maybe more, but those times have changed. So you do currently have the two options of the 10-day or the 30-day. 30 days is automatic unless you do the identity scans prior to starting. And then if your pet is an export from Australia, you also get the 10 days automatically, and you can skip the microchips identity scan. So it is important because we know Australia is very, very strict in their guidelines for pets arriving, and we want to make sure that all of the pets are following all of the correct vaccinations and rabies testing. So they want to make sure ultimately that there are no rabies. They are rabies-free countries. So quarantine to them is very, very important, and they take it very seriously. So we want to make sure if you are ever trying to do anything on your own, there is always the possibility that something can get missed. So it is very highly recommended to use a pet travel team so they can check all of the documentation. Unfortunately, again, they do not allow any visit from clients. Now, we have had only one occasion where one pet was really, really nervous and not eating. They did allow it, but that is on a case by case, and that was only the one time. So your pets are very, very well cared for. They're very well looked after in quarantine.
Yeah. So I heard you mention 10-day quarantine versus 30 days. I think mostly everybody would prefer a 10-day quarantine over 30. What sort of, requirements are around that? Like, how can you get away with a 10-day quarantine versus a 30-day quarantine?
So that's going to be dependent on the microchip identity scans, and that is what starts the process off. So this has to be done prior to the rabies teeter test, prior to anything else. That is what Rosie had discussed at the beginning. I know some of you may have missed that with the technical difficulties. But if you want to do the 10-day quarantine, you must do the 3-step microchip identity scans. Otherwise, you will receive 30 days.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Looks like we may still be having some technical issues, unfortunately, that I want to make sure we address. Let's take another quick pause and make sure that we can get this resolved. Thank you. All right, we are back, and as they say, third time's the charm. So hopefully we've resolved any technical difficulties that we were experiencing previously, and we can dive back into our live Q&A. So we were just answering questions about pet travel and quarantine expectations. And it looks like we have another question that just came in the chat here. What if my pet has medication or a special diet? So I think this can pertain obviously like more broadly to some of our other destinations, but anything specifically that we would like to call out about pets that may have dietary restrictions or like they need to eat at a certain time? How does that apply to pet travel to Australia? Rosie, you might be better suited to answer this question.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, every pet, every need is going to be individualized, and so that is something that we really like to cover on the initial phone call, just to figure out, whether it's medication or handling, um, any sort of notes like that. We like to start working with you on as soon as possible. So, if there are special accommodations that need to be made, we can reach out to the team at quarantine to ensure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. Most often, it's just some extra paperwork and permissions that are needed. So we can help guide you through that as far as what paperwork to get filled out between you and your vet. And then, sometimes there are certain medications that, for instance, might need to be refrigerated. I know that quarantine there in Australia can accommodate refrigerated medications most often, but we do also have to factor in aspects like what flight routing is your pet taking, and will that medication be okay for making the trip from the US to Australia, or is that something that you need to, say, work with a vet in Australia to have sent to quarantine locally? Similarly, with food options, you cannot send food from the US to Australia quarantine. So any sort of special dietary needs would have to be locally sourced and shipped to quarantine ahead of time. Did I miss anything there, Molly?
No, that covers it. Most of it is going to be on a case by case basis. And when you are assigned to myself, Rosie, or Sage, any of your pet travel coordinators can talk this through with you. But as long as it's sourced from Australia, and then it can be delivered directly to quarantine ahead of time. Medications are definitely going to be on a case by case, and there's additional documentation that is required. So if your pet is on any medications, it's really important that you notify your pet travel coordinator so that we can help make sure that we have the correct documentation needed, not just for quarantine, but for the flights and boarding, if boarding is needed as well.
I'll also add on there that, while I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about sedatives and anti anxiety medications, the airlines and quarantine obviously don't want to administer any medications or treatments that aren't truly essential to your pet. So, sometimes a vet might come to you and say, how about an anti anxiety medication? But items like that can be problematic for getting the needed approval. So I would definitely stick to the essentials for travel purposes.
Yep. And I think another question that comes up, which is, along the lines of anxiety medication, is can I sedate my pet. I don't think that's recommended in any scenario when it comes to travel. Do you have anything more to share on that? Like, maybe it's as simple as how can you prepare your pet when they're about to jump into a really high anxiety situation?
Yeah, so there are a few different things you can do to help get your pet ready for travel. I think one of the best things you can do is focus on doing some crate training. That could mean setting up the crate piece by piece. Put the bottom half in a common space where your pet likes to spend time. You could consider doing things like putting its food and water dishes in the crate while it gets used to the bottom half, and then introduce the top half. Then add on the door. Start doing short periods with the door closed so that your pet not only becomes comfortable and has the crate as a safe space during travel, it also helps reinforce that, yeah, well, it goes into the crate, always going to come out again. You could do things like put a blanket over the crate and put on a YouTube track with airplane noises to help sort of simulate that environment that your pet will be traveling in, or you could even potentially work up to taking your pet through like a drive-through car wash.
Hmm.
Um, Now, sedatives are a really, really big no-no. I don't think there's a single airline out there that is happy to have a sedated pet, just because that can be a potential health risk, particularly for elderly, ill, or snub-nosed pets. But even generalized anti-anxiety medications can often be denied by the airline because they can have sedative-like effects. So you could consider looking into Feel Away for cats or Rescue Remedy, both of which are pheromone-based calming sprays. And those can be really helpful to spritz on, the comfort bedding inside the travel crate.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I'm a cat owner myself, and they're constantly rubbing themselves up against me. So I think having some sort of familiar scent in their crate is really comforting when they're traveling such a long distance. Um, and speaking of traveling such a long distance, what sort of flight options are available to pet parents? Obviously the continental US is a large area. So like if you're living in California, what does the flight path look like there versus for someone living on the other side of the country in New York, per se?
We have two airline options at this time. Qantas has two departure locations, so LAX and DFW, LA and Dallas. Um, the flight days, LA has departure 5 days, 7 days a week, I believe. And Qatar, we have multiple locations. Not every flight is a pet friendly flight. So you may have to travel to a more local departure airport. Qatar does have locations like Miami, Atlanta, JFK, Chicago. That one also goes out of Dallas, but there are different options. Qantas, again, out of LA and Dallas, is a direct flight, and Qatar, out of the multiple locations, does have a stopover in Doha.
Hmm. Okay. So it seems like there's, plenty of options depending on where you are. Another question in the chat is how often will people receive updates when their pet is traveling? So, Molly, that may be a good one for you to answer.
When your pet is with Starwood or with a Starwood agent on the US side, we have something called care tags, and our team can provide you updates by text or email, and then those will come when they are with your pet. So let's say there's a final vet appointment that is done 2 to 5 days prior to departure, whether our team is collecting for that final vet appointment or returning them to boarding, you will receive some basic updates throughout that process. Now, when they are checked in for the flight, our team will provide that final update. The airlines do not provide any updates, unfortunately. But we
Mm,
do share with you the flight information. You can follow along on the flight or the airway bill, which is actually connected to their kennel. That's the one we do recommend following along. So you'll be able to see when they actually take off, when they arrive. Now, when they get to quarantine or on arrival, quarantine does not really provide any immediate updates. They do provide one very generic email just letting you know your pet has arrived, but that comes about 4 hours after arrival. And then, as far as updates while they're in quarantine, if you do not receive any updates, that's good news. No news is good news. If you're not hearing anything, your pet is eating normally, toileting normally, they're not having any concerns. Alternatively, if they do have any concerns, even on arrival, they will reach out to you immediately and share their concerns. So if your pet is not eating, they may ask if, what can they offer that might help tempt their appetite? What can they send to whet their appetite? Some pet owners have even sent in like Ubered a roasted chicken to quarantine. There are different options. You can send their favorite snack. But again, as Rosie said, it just has to be sourced and brand new from Australia.
mm. Wow. I can't believe someone Uber eats a rotisserie chicken to quarantine. That's a new one that I've never heard before. And I know Rosie, I think it was you that mentioned earlier that, you have to receive certain approvals for special diets and whatnot. Does that also apply to getting food delivered to quarantine, or are the rules less strict there? Molly, maybe
Um,
you know that.
You just have to send, it's not pre-approval. Like if they reach out to you and say your pet is not eating, you don't need pre-approval. You can let them know the order number, but you need to have specific delivery instructions that will include where to send the food and the pet's import permit number.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting to know. So I heard you mention care tags a little bit ago. I like to chat more about that. So pretty much anybody that opts into traveling with Starwood can opt to add on care tags, which helps provide real-time updates to where their pet is. And I know that care tags has also been going through some pretty big upgrades as of recently. So it does add that peace of mind to your pet's travel, which like really helps put a pet parent at ease when they're separated with their dog or cat for a certain amount of time. We also have another question that just popped up in the chat from Rachikana9229. Hi there, we're unsure if our dog will be traveling with us. Can we start the relocation process? Steps 1 through 3 and hire pay Starwood for those initial steps while we make our decision. So Rosie, that might be a good one for you to answer.
sure. So, we're definitely able to help you, and cancellation is available at any time. When you accept the quote with us, if you scroll to the bottom of the quote, there will be a section called, FQ&A, and in there we do outline our refund policy. So as far as how much we'll be able to offer back, it's impacted most largely by how long you've spent going through the process with us so far. I think, you know, most relevant to Australia is, by the time we get through to the RNAT declaration, import permit, and quarantine reservation, those come with additional processing fees and or cancellation fees. So just be mindful that, it will be a decreasing amount the further into the process you get.
Yeah, but
But
I think
at the same time, we're definitely happy to help you kind of get the ball rolling and support you as you begin the process.
yeah, and I think it's important to mention too that, again, it is such a time-intensive process, so the sooner you get started, the better. And, you know, I don't know that there's like a rush on starting it with Starwood, but like you can certainly pay your initial deposit with us and get started. We also have a pretty robust pet travel portal that helps you track everything from inception to the end of your pet's move, just to help make the process even more clear and transparent, easy for you.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll put out there for Australia moves, especially, is if you are considering bringing a pet with you, there are some fees associated with the initial uh, microchip identification process. Uh, the initial three steps are $101, I believe, for the USDA processing for each step per pet. So there are some costs involved in that that will be to you. We do also provide a detailed PDF that you can review. That includes detailed instructions for your vet. But I definitely think it's helpful for everyone to kind of get your pet started sooner rather than kind of leave them to later.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak more to like I know there's strict timelines around when you need certain documentation done, and I believe that certain documents can actually expire if you get it done too soon. Does that apply to Australia as well?
That is a very good point. Thanks, Georgiana. So for the identification scan purposes, that sort of sets the date for doing the titer test. Obviously, the validity for earliest possible entry date begins 180 days after the titer test has been performed, which we usually recommend doing after the identification scan process has been completed. As a heads up, typically a titer test is anywhere from about $400 to $800, depending on what vet you visit, so it can be worth shopping around. Um, and so 180 days from the time that the lab receives the blood work, and that is valid for up to 1 year for entry. And so, if for example you do go over that 1 year, you would need to get the titer test redone.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's certainly helpful to know, and I know that we've established the time it takes is typically 9 months, but it looks like, the fact that that one test is valid for 1 year just means you can, get an edge up after you book with Starwood to get things moving a bit quicker. Um, Also in the chat now, we have a question. We are moving to Australia in 2 months. Our pet will be living in Canada with our family. Can we do steps 1 through 3 in the US and the rest while in Canada? Will tests and regulations vary? I'm going to hop back to our timeline here because this is what the commenter is referencing, steps 1 through 3. So again, they're wondering if they can do steps 1 through 3 in the US and the rest in Canada. So it looks like, do regulations or requirements change based on that? Molly or Rosie, I'm not sure which one of you wants to dive into that.
The regulations are different depending on what country you are departing from. So if we're starting the process in the US, we need to finish the process. The process has to be done fully through the US. Because we are using the USDA. They are going to be approving much of the documentation throughout the process. So the regulations from Canada would be different. You would not be able to do part of the process in the US and part of the process in Canada. However, there is the potential that if you are coming back to the U.S., you can finish that process in the U.S. once started.
That's helpful. Um, so I guess to elaborate on that a bit more, and I apologize if this is kind of like a reverberation of your answer, but so if they started in the US, would they have to redo everything in Canada to complete the process, or could they transfer, some of those initial steps and tests over to Canada to complete it there?
So there is a different process through Canada, and I'm not certain what that is. Our team really doesn't manage anything through Canada. It is just departure out of the U.S. Now, we have worked with clients before and helped and assisted a little bit in managing departures out of the U.S. I'm sorry, departures out of Canada, but that is not something that we see too often. Typically, it's just going to be if you're in Canada, you work with a Canadian agent, and then if when you're in the U.S., you work with the U.S. agent. Just typically because they are really fully aware of the requirements. We have a really amazing documents team that we work with who back us. We would not be able to do this without them. They are so incredibly knowledgeable that any questions that we ask, we can go back to them. If there's documentation, things that even Rosie, Sage, or I may not know, they always have an answer for us.
Yep. Another question we had previously, how do you handle snub-nosed pets? Rosie, this may be a good one for you.
Yeah, so uh, stub noses are obviously a little bit more sensitive with the respiratory system. So one of the biggest concerns is going to be from the airlines as far as kennel fit goes. And so for an average pet, an airline will want to see that they have at least 3 inches of space in front of them, behind them, and above them all at once in order for a kennel fit to be considered compliant. With snub nose breeds, they take that and say one size up. So instead of having, about extra inches in length, they would probably be looking to have more like 10 to 12 inches in length, and a bit of extra height as well. And that's just to provide, guarantee that the pet will have adequate air circulation and ventilation as they travel, particularly at altitude um, while the live animal cargo hold is pressurized and climate controlled. They just kind of want to give that extra bit of protection for these sensitive pets. And then we also, between Starwood's policies and airline policies, snub-nosed pets are not allowed to travel basically from the start of June through the end of September, just because those higher temperatures can make breathing a little bit more difficult for these sweet snub-nosed pets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, and just wanted to share with anybody on the live stream right now that we are streaming to multiple different places. So if you don't see questions coming in, it's likely that they're being typed from another platform. But we're going to make sure we get to every question that we're finding being sent in the chat here. What is the identification process? So I know we touched on that a bit earlier when we were going over the timeline, but maybe we could dive into that a little bit more specifically. So Rosie or Molly, whichever one of you would like to take that.
The microchip identification process is going to be a 3-step process. So the first step is to schedule an appointment with a USDA certified vet. You're going to need 2 USDA certified vets, separate locations, separate addresses. It can be like a sister company. I do recommend reaching out to your vet and see if there's any other certified vets they have worked with before. That's always a good sign that they have good communication. But you need 2 separate vet appointments. It can be done the same day, it can be done the following day, whatever works best for you and your pet for those first 2 appointments. At that appointment, they are going to scan the microchip, make sure it's working, make sure it matches their records. They're going to take some specific pictures when we provide the instructions for that. And they are going to fill out a form, and then they will submit that to the USDA. Once we have back both of those first 2 appointments, those endorsed documents, the third step then would be for you to choose one of the first 2 vets to submit them together for that final approval. that third step would be required for the 10-day quarantine. The instructions that we provide, the first half is kind of a step-by-step and overview, and we will go over that on your onboarding call as well. And then the second half of that document are going to be step-by-step instructions for your vet. So you can actually send that to your vet so we can talk with you about what to ask when you're scheduling the appointments and any other questions that you have. And your vet is always welcome to ask questions as well.
Yeah. One other resource I wanted to share, because you mentioned that you need two USDA certified vets, is that you can actually go on, I believe it's the USDA website, and search for your city or state to easily locate USDA certified vets that way. And I'm sure, the pet travel coordinators on our team would also be, happy to help you through that step as well.
One other thing I want to make quick mention of with the microchip process, from the time that you start the microchip identification process all the way through the end, we are going to be regularly recommending that you have your pet's microchip scanned anytime they're heading into the vet, whether it's for this official process or for other vaccinations. Even if your pet has been microchipped for 8 years or 8 months, it's still a good idea because sometimes microchips can stop functioning. They can drift from a shoulder to chest. Pets can even reject them almost like a splinter. And without that microchip in good working order and correctly listed, it would basically invalidate any of the previous steps. So, if you are thinking about moving, but you're not quite ready to start the formal microchip identification scan process, I would just make sure that your pet is chipped and getting regularly checked until you're ready to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know my animals are microchipped, and when we moved from New Orleans to Pennsylvania, we didn't update the microchip information right away. I know it's not, internationally that we moved them, but yeah, it's definitely important to, maintain that information and just get a head start on the international move process to make sure that, you can be contacted through that scannable information on your pet.
The microchip also for Australia very specifically has to be ISO compliant, meaning a 15-digit numeric chip. I know occasionally we do see pets with avid chips, which are typically 9-digit alpha numeric. Those avid chips are not accepted, so definitely make sure your pet is ISO microchipped.
And how can would that be a question that you just ask with your vet to make sure that it is ISO compliant?
Exactly. Yeah, I would have your vet do a microchip scan, and if you see 15 numbers, you're in good shape.
Okay, that's helpful. Another question we have, how long is quarantine and can it be shortened? I know we spoke to quarantine earlier in the call, so maybe we could reopen that conversation a bit and talk about the 10 versus 30-day quarantine waiting periods again.
Yeah, quarantine is specifically 10 days or 30 days. There is no in between. We have had clients come to us before who have heard that you can quarantine at home with them. That is not an option. There is no option to shorten it, no option to change that timing at all. It is either 10 days with the microchip identity scan or it will be 30 days.
Okay. And so the other part of their question was, is there any way to shorten it? So can you elaborate on that a bit more? Like let's say they were set at the 30-day quarantine, how can they shorten it to the 10-day period?
So if they come on and they're going with a 30-day, the only way to get the 7-day is to start the process over. The microchip identity scan absolutely has to be done at the very beginning of the process. So, sorry about that. So microchip has to be placed, so ISO, then the identity scan, the rabies teeter test, and then the RNAT, and so forth and so on. You have to do the microchip identity scan at the very beginning of the process. You cannot decide to come back and do it later, or you would have to restart the process. There's no other way around.
Okay. Another question we have, is there a way around the 180-day wait? And I'm not familiar really with the 180-day wait period, so maybe you could like speak to what that is and if there are any workarounds, and if not, why?
So the 180-day wait time is going to be the earliest eligible departure date after the lab, or when the lab receives the blood work from the rabies teeter test. So we talked about the microchip identity scans at the very beginning, and then when that process is finished, and you have the endorsements, that allows you for the 10-day quarantine. But regardless of where you're at, when the lab receives the blood work, the 180-day wait time starts. And one of the questions that we get asked is, how can I speed this up? How can my pet leave? There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is 180-day wait time for everyone. This includes governmental workers. This includes diplomats. It does not matter who you are. All pets must follow the same rules and regulations. As you know, Australia is, again, one of the strictest to get into for your pet. So they do not allow any kind of shortcuts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also understand that I think there's some similarities between Australia and New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I know both of those areas are both quite complex and have similar, waiting times and whatnot. So if anyone on the call knows someone that's moving a pet to New Zealand, we're happy to help there as well. We are going to start winding down here pretty soon, but if you do have any questions, we encourage you to drop them in the chat now so we can answer them before our live Q&A ends. Just combing through to make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay. Well, let's get into our live winners for the event. I'm going to pull up a different screen here. Just give me a moment. Molly and Rosie, while I'm pulling up the winner slide, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think is really important to know about pet parents moving to Australia?
I would say specifically, a lot of times we see clients that are starting out on their own, and then as they get throughout the process, they feel it becomes a little bit more difficult and confusing, and that's when they decide to hire us. Unfortunately, we are already past some mistakes that the vet or the clients have maybe mixed up the steps or have done the rabies teeter test prior to the microchip identity scans. Those are the biggest issues, and when clients come to us halfway through, we see that they have to restart the process in order to get the 10-day quarantine, or documentation has to be redone. They might be ready to schedule quarantine, but unfortunately, because the documentation was not done properly, something is missed, date of births don't match. If you're seeing different vets, oftentimes they will have different date of births listed. So we see a lot of those kind of issues. I highly, highly encourage you to start out by reaching out with us, reaching out to us to see how we can help your move. And you'll start off with Ross or Ben, who are really, really incredible and very knowledgeable. So if you have questions, please know we are here to help out. We want to be able to ensure we can answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to ask us. Let us know how we can help.
Thank you. Rosie, any final words of wisdom before we get into our giveaway winners?
I would just kind of build off of what Molly was saying, particularly with early stage documentation. So if you're considering moving in 2 years, but your pet is due for a rabies vaccination this year, one thing I would very strongly recommend is make sure that you use a full service vet clinic, ideally USDA accredited if you could find it. Um, Having a USDA vet is not currently a requirement for the rabies vaccinations heading into Australia, but that is something that they've talked about changing. So if you're able to work with a USDA vet from the get go, establish that relationship, and then definitely be wary of vaccination only clinics because it can be very hard to get any edits made to the needed paperwork, and that can cause issues down the line.
Hmm. Words of wisdom. Thank you both so much. All right, without further ado, I'm going to share our giveaway winner. So, Rach It Kana 9229 on YouTube, you have won a Starwood Pet Travel bandana. Katie Cleland on LinkedIn, you have won the $20 Amazon gift card. And we have not decided on a winner for the $200 off a Starwood Pet Travel move yet. So if you're interested, be the first one to send us an email to info@starwoodpet.com so we can distribute your prize. Again, thank you so much for joining our live Q&A today. We do host these monthly with a different topic every time. And if you want to get started with your pet's move, shoot us a message on social or email us at info@starwoodpet.com. Thanks again for joining. And thank you so much, Molly and Rosie, for joining us today as well. All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Have a good one.